Today on Your Daily Detroit, we're talking in depth about flooding in Southwest Detroit that impacted hundreds of homes. What happened and what might be next? We talk about it with Malachi Barrett of Bridge Detroit. I'm Jer Staes, and it is Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. Let's get started. Joining us at the table at Tech Town is none other than reporter for Bridge Detroit. And I want to say, I really appreciate your work, Malachi Barrett. First time on the show, but I know this isn't the first time we've talked.
Yeah, no, I think we met for the first time at Mackinac at the policy conference. And I've been a longtime listener. I love the show and what you do to bring exposure to stuff going on in the region. So thanks for having me.
Well, I got to say, with our topic today, have you dried off yet?
My feet are still a little soaked from icy floodwaters in Southwest Detroit. But other than that, I'm pretty warm. I'm doing okay.
That's good to hear. And about that, because wow, woke up on Monday morning and just started to see all kinds of reports of what's going on. You've been doing some great work on the ground for Bridge Detroit. So let's get started with the basics. What happened out there that flooded blocks of Southwest Detroit?
Yeah, this was an all hands on deck response from us this morning. I woke up and got a newsletter from Fox 2 saying that there had been flooding in Southwest. I didn't realize the extent of it until I clicked on the story and saw the photos. Water up to 5 feet, flooding basements up to the first floor in a lot of circumstances. So we decided to go out there and see what was going on. And we learned today that basically a water main, water transmission line operated by GLEWA, the Great Lakes Water Authority, in Southwest Detroit, just east really of El Asador Steakhouse over there, a good spot, broke around 2 a.m. Residents reported hearing like a really loud bang at like 2 a.m. And immediately city officials were scrambling to kind of identify what had gone wrong, how much water was coming out, what needed to happen. And basically over the course of about 5 hours, the city at the water department working with GLEWA were able to isolate the spot on the line that was broken, turn the water off, start to get some pumps in there and hopefully get the water to recede. In the meantime, we couldn't even quantify it. I asked the GLEWA director today how much water actually was flowing from the system for those 5 hours, and she said a lot, but didn't have a number. I would estimate thousands of gallons of water probably. It was comparable to the 2021 floods that people probably recall in that, there were cars floating in the street. It was complicated a little bit by the fact that it was like 19 degrees this morning. And so all of that flood water, there was a layer of ice on top of it. But really what we witnessed was an all hands on deck from the emergency response angle to evacuate people from those homes, get them set up in shelter. And so that's kind of what we're going to be watching moving forward.
The visuals were stunning in our member Discord. People were sharing Instagram reels and TikToks and things of water, not just in the street, not just on the sidewalks, but right up to people's yards. Visually, when you were on the ground there, how did it feel for you to see all that?
It was disastrous. It reminded me very much of the 21 flood, which was a federal emergency. It affected a wider area of the city than this, but it was very similar, look on the ground. People, there was one homeowner who told me he woke up this morning to water rushing into his house from the side door through his backyard, basically burst into his house like a dam breaking. And he described it as, a river of water flushing through. Nothing could really stop that. People are somewhat familiar, I think, with basement backups and floods happening from the sewage system. This is a little bit different because it was a water main break. The water was coming in from outside. And, thankfully it was, not sewage water. So the cleanup will be a little bit easier there. But you had some, I was talking to one gentleman who was standing at the end of the street, and about 2 blocks up, his dog was sitting on the porch, probably a little confused, barking a little bit about, with some of the first responders going by, but he had no way to go back and rescue his dog. People obviously were stranded as well. There were inflatable boats from, I think, Shelby Township. The emergency response was, far and wide across the kind of 3-county area over here. Duggan said today there were some folks who drove about an hour down to offer some support, but they had inflatable boats that they were dragging people through the water. Families with kids, seniors who were mobility limited and had, issues getting around that were trapped in their homes. There were more than 60 people that were evacuated that way this morning, and a lot more that were brought out by neighbors, there were a number of people that had, those rubber waders and big like duck hunting, boots on, trudging through the water. But yeah, I mean, it was up to a knee in some places, up to your waist and more. It's been receding throughout the day. I think if you were to go out there now, it probably would be, more to your ankle or something. But yeah, it's hard to even really put into words. I've never really seen anything like that before.
I want to get into the response, but first, let's draw people a picture because Southwest Detroit's kind of big.
Mm-hmm.
Where exactly are we talking about? I know it's near I-75, and there's a rail line nearby.
It's basically just north of the Fisher Freeway and kind of tucked between that and the railroad you mentioned. It was on Beard and Rowan where it burst, and it spread about 4 or 5 blocks west, about the same distance east. Unclear how many homes are actually affected. The city did not have a number for that today, but there were some folks that were putting together like UPS data to track how many homes. It might have been around 450 houses actually in the impact area drawn by Gliwa.
That's huge. 450 homes. That's huge. And that's a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you imagine every one of those homes has, 2 to 3 people in it. And we heard from a lot of like intergenerational families. Is very common, in Detroit, where you've got grandparents, their kids and their kids all kind of staying in one situation. So a lot of neighbors trying to figure out what they could do to help their neighbors today. A lot of, community response in addition to like the emergency responders there too, trying to go knock on doors and get people out.
So this is not a federal emergency. This is a more local emergency. How is this response being handled between Gliwa and then I assume the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department? How's that splitting up?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because, with the changes to our water system that happened as a result of bankruptcy, you have kind of this dual government response here. What's interesting about this is the mayor today said that residents who are affected will have costs covered, basically, for damages and to replace water heaters, boilers, all those utilities that were damaged by the flooding. Gliwa and the city will split that cost 50-50. It's unclear how that program will work moving forward. The city put up a hotline, and we don't know what kind of like limits there might be or the details or shape of that reimbursement program, but that is a good sign for folks that the city's committed to reimbursing them for the cost of any uninsured damage. There are some people I talked to that had flood insurance, but they weren't sure how that would apply here because it wasn't a natural disaster. The mayor said another silver lining of this is you don't have to get FEMA involved. And, the federal process of applying for FEMA aid was very slow. There's some people, even from those 21 floods that we mentioned, that are still trying to get help through the feds. So this is a much more streamlined process. The city has set up just one individual hotline. That's the one-stop shop for everybody calling in for support. And that's 313-774-5261. And that's where people can go to get set up in hotels temporarily until heated water is turned back on. The city is going to cover the cost of hotel stays for people, as well as pay for some food. And they can get on that list to have a city inspector eventually come out and assess the damage.
Does this raise any questions about aging infrastructure? Because this pipe has been in the ground. I was reading some reports. I want to say the 1930s?
That's what Gliwa said. Yeah, they didn't give a specific date, but
so that's 90 or 100 years of infrastructure under the ground there. Then, although steel, and being in Detroit for a while, I've seen some crazy infrastructure that's been dug up over the years. Yes, it's a steel pipe, but also you have to wonder, like, what is the useful life of these things? Are there other surprises, not just in Detroit, but across the region with these kind of things?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I don't really know what the strategy is to replace water mains like this. The city's doing a lot to replace lead lines right now. It has a lot more to do there. But I think that's where a lot of the reporting will go in the next week or so, is identifying how the hell did this happen? Because there's really not a good answer for that yet, besides the kind of shrinking and growing that the ground goes through in the winter with the temperature fluctuations. I mean, that's a common cause of water main breaks that happen fairly regularly, not anything to this extent, obviously, but water mains, you get a couple every few months in the winter. But yeah, like, what is the solution here? I mean, does everyone who lives on a block where there's a pipe of this age, do they have reason to worry in the winter? We don't really have a good sense of that right now.
Housing's another concern for the people who are immediately affected by this. There are some plans from the city and from Gliwa for that, right?
Yeah, they're putting people up in a Sonesta extended stay hotel anyone can call that hotline that I gave, and they will pay for your room, and they'll pay for food as well. And that's supposed to be until you can safely move back into your house, which means you have your electricity and heat.
I imagine, though, still the remediation is going to take a while. No, it's not sewage water, but I can't imagine this much water into a basement. In some cases, if something's coming through somebody's side door, that's getting up to your like main floor and things like that. And I mean, some of these homes are going to be brick and stone and different things, but you're going to have stuff in the basement. You're going to have drywall. You're going to have just so many different complications that are possible with this. Plus the freezing, because it is so darn cold out there right now.
Right. And just like how long will it take for the inspections to happen on their own? You have to have someone come out and look at the damage and give you a number for what they think is a fair, and maybe you'll dispute that. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and that, it can come with a process like this. And people have gone through this before with basement backup protection, the FEMA help in the 21 floods. And, it can be kind of a difficult process. The mayor has said that they're going to try to streamline this and make it as simple as possible for folks. But that was a question they weren't able to answer today. I asked them, how long do you think it will be until people can move back in their houses? They don't really know at this point.
Bridge Detroit does such a great job of adding context to your stories and kind of staying with things long term. What are some of the things that you're thinking about now for coverage in the next coming weeks and months?
Yeah, I mean, on kind of another end, you mentioned the kind of housing support network that needs to rise up for these people that have been displaced. I think this is going to be potentially another test of our, housing shelter, our homeless assistance network. A week after we saw a pretty catastrophic failure of that with the death of the 2 children in the casino parking garage. So I think it continues to reiterate some of these challenges that Detroiters are facing on a daily basis, between the aging infrastructure, between the lack of resources, between the threats to housing stability. I mean, I don't think that this was on their bingo card for flooding, but flooding certainly has displaced people before. So I think for me, it's how resilient is the city, in these situations. Certainly the response was quick. City officials were patting themselves on the back for putting together a complicated response to this today, but how did we get here? And what do we do to prevent something like this from happening in the future? And of course, this is happening in a mayoral election year. And so we've been asking candidates who want to replace Mike Duggan what they would do to fix some of these situations. And it kind of makes you think, like, this is a tough job being the mayor. Do these people that are lining up, do they realize they might be woken up by a phone call at 2 a.m. of a neighborhood underwater? I think it adds a lot more kind of urgency around some of these conversations we're having about who's leading the city.
Not just with the city, but Duggan is a candidate for governor.
True.
So the state is also watching how he's responding to this, because a state as large as ours, these kind of things can happen anywhere, whether it's a water main break or some other kind of tragedy. You're dealing with stuff from here to Lansing to Marquette to Crystal Falls.
Imagine Whitmer's whole first term was a dam breaking that devastated,
I put that out of my mind.
And Benton Harbor with a lead water crisis, let alone the pandemic, and probably 2 things I've forgotten on top of that. So yeah, definitely.
Malachi Barrett, I really appreciate you. Where can people follow you and learn more and keep up with everything?
Yeah, find us at bridgedetroit.com. We are a nonprofit newsroom here serving the city, and we can't do that without the support and feedback from people. We need to hear from you directly. What information do you not have that you need? What are the things that you want us to be looking into? You can also subscribe to our newsletters for free. I do a weekly city council notebook that really is like everything you need to know about what the city council is doing, as well as, bits of political intrigue throughout this year. It's also free. So yeah, find us online, subscribe to our newsletters, find me on Twitter. I'm at Polar Barrett, but
that's one great handle.
Thank you.
But also 2, part of the excellent media row that's really happening up here in Detroit now. Back in the day it was Lafayette Avenue, but now you guys are down the street. Here at Tech Town, you got the Detroit News. There's just so much happening up here. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, I love it. We're like 3 blocks away, so you reached out today, and I could pop right over. And I love what Outlier is doing here in the building too.
Oh yeah, shout out to them. Yeah, Orlando's great. He's been on the show.
Right, and former Bridge Detroit leader as well. So,
yeah,
we're all working together on the same mission. But I'm glad that we can kind of do it in our own flavors.
Local media isn't possible without local support, so thanks to Angela, who joined us, and Jeffrey that upped their support at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. The social media apps, the podcast apps, they do not pay us. And no, there's no large corporation behind what we do. Our independent work is supported by you, our listeners, and local sponsors. So get swag, get access to our private Discord community chat, and more. Patreon.com/Daily Detroit. Until tomorrow, I'm Jer Staes. Remember that you are somebody, and I'll see you around Detroit.